All right, shall we begin? Hi, everyone. My name is Jasmine Mahmood, she, her pronouns. I am faculty at the University of Washington in Seattle, and I'm so honored to be guiding our last session of these amazing 2 days on Market Audience with our illustrious panelists. Inspired by Sarah Wilbur, because many of us have been sitting for a few days, I thought we could start with an embodied exercise. I actually had 3 prepared, but I decided only to do 1. And one of them was a singing exercise, but I've decided only to do 1 of them. Inspired by where I live, Seattle, Washington, we're going to do the game, the rainstorm exercise, which many of you might know from camp. I learned it from a student, I didn't learn it in camp. All right, so what we're gonna do is we're going to use our bodies to evoke a rainstorm. And I will give you instructions. I'm gonna put my mic down, and we'll start with that. Okay, so first we're going to rub our hands together. And then we're going to snap our fingers. And then clap our hands. Slap our thighs. Stomp our feet. Slap our thighs. Clap our hands. Snap our fingers. And rub our hands together. Amazing, thank you all. Thank you all. You can check in how your body is feeling in this moment. So, inspired by the illustrious Charlotte Canning, I want to begin our panel with 2 definitions. Audience, noun, the assembled spectators or listeners at a public event, such as a play, movie, concert, or meeting. From late Middle English, from Old French, from Latin audientia, from audere, to hear. And I'm also thinking about, many of you have seen the Oscar Eustis TED Talk, which I actually saw in person when I was in St. Louis, where he talks about when you're in the audience for a movie theater and it's empty, you're so happy. But when you're in the audience for a theater show and it's empty, you're really sad. And you're really happy when you see theater with a full audience. And the second word is market, which is a noun and a verb, a regular gathering of people for the purchase and sale of provisions, livestock, or other commodities. And also as a verb to advertise or promote, from Latin macare, to buy. So thinking about audience and market, to hear and to buy. So for today, I'm really, really honored to be on this panel with such illustrious folks. I was telling Nataki that I am awestruck to be in her presence and to be in the presence of all the panelists. Our order for the day, I'm gonna have the panelists introduce themselves, and then I'll introduce myself and set off the framing, and then they'll respond to the framing, I'll respond to the framing. If there's time, we might have a little bit of dialogue, and then we'll end with that kind of manifestation, and if there's time after that, we'll have Q&A. So with that, I'll hand it over, and maybe Nataki will start with you for introductions to introduce our amazing panelists.
So I created this introduction in alignment with the series of prompts. So I'm Nataki Garrett. I'm an artistic leader, I'm a director, an advocate for systemic change in the arts and beyond. I currently serve as the co-artistic director of One Nation, One Project, and the initiative Arts for Everybody. I'm also the chair of the board of directors at Theater Communications Group, otherwise known as TCG. And my work is dedicated to creating inclusive, thriving organizations by centering intentionality, radical honesty, and systems change. I'm deeply committed to the intersection of arts and public health and social justice. So as co-artistic director of One Nation, One Project, Arts for Everybody, I lead a national initiative that harnesses the power of the arts to promote community well-being. Through partnerships with municipalities and federally funded health centers, we're proving how the arts is an essential tool for healing and well-being, connection, social cohesion, and civic engagement. Throughout my career, I've led major institutions through critical transitions. It's sort of the thing I do. So as Executive Artistic Director of Oregon Shakespeare Festival, I navigated one of the most turbulent periods in the organization's as well as the field's history. steering it through financial crisis and global pandemic while expanding access, diversifying program, and advocating for the survival of nonprofit theaters. During my tenure, I co-founded and co-led the national advocacy effort, Professional Nonprofit Theater Coalition, working with the Broadway League and the National Independent Venue Association to ensure that nonprofit arts would have access to the $15 billion in shuttered venue operators funding. Before OSF, I served as acting artistic director at the Denver Center for the Performing Arts. Prior to that, I served as associate artistic director and associate dean at CalArts and CalArts Center for New Performance. As a director, my work has been seen in some of the nation's most prominent stages, and my commitment to artistic excellence, inclusion, and storytelling was recognized with the 2024 Doris Duke Artist Award for Theater. In addition to my artistic leadership, I am the CEO and founder of Ladder Leadership Services, where I coach and mentor leaders across nonprofit arts, academia, and beyond. And through my Ladder Leadership approach, I equip women and people of color with the tools to dismantle outdated systems, build innovative and inclusive teams, and drive meaningful and long-lasting change. And so that's where I come to you from.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be here, and thank all of you for coming on this beautiful Saturday afternoon. My name is Donna Walker-Kuhn. My pronouns are she, her. I come in from New York. I am president of my own company and founder Walker International Communications Group. And my company focuses on diversity, equity, and inclusion in arts and culture, audience development, community engagement, and social justice. I began my career after I graduated from law school at Howard University, and moving to New York, practicing law, prosecuting juveniles, I realized that I really missed the arts, because originally I'm from Chicago, and I grew up with a dance company that my sisters and some other friends, we created. And we performed a lot, and we taught a lot of dance. And even though I wanted to save the world, which is why I went to law school, I still missed the connection with the arts. And so I was complaining to some of my colleagues, and they said, well, you know, across the street, there's the Thelma Hill Performing Arts Center. So I went over there on my lunch hour, and that's when I found my mission. So when I walked in the room, there was papers everywhere. It was completely disorganized. And then there was Larry Phillips, the producer. And I said, you know, I can come help you on my lunch hour. And he was so happy. So I just started to read the papers. I said, I know my alphabet, and I can file. So I started to organize the files, and I realized that there was press releases, there were proposals, things that, you know, what arts organizations use, that's the engine. And so basically, on my lunch hour, while prosecuting juveniles, I taught myself how to become an arts administrator. And so when my lunch hour started to extend until 4 p.m., and judges were looking for Counsel Walker, I knew it was time to go. And so I resigned, and I wrote my first proposal to pay myself a salary as managing director of the Thelma Hill Performing Arts Center. And I started, because that's how I launched my career. And then I still wanted to be close to dance, and I kept hearing about the Dance Theater of Harlem and Arthur Mitchell. So I wrote a letter to Arthur Mitchell, and I said, you know, I can do all these things. And the day my letter arrived, his marketing director had resigned. It was 2 weeks before their New York season, and ticket sales were at 35%. When he received my letter, he called me. He said, I got your letter. Can you sell tickets? I said, yes. That was my interview, and that's how I began. And so for 9 years, I was able to work with an absolute genius, Arthur Mitchell, in multiple roles. But what really kind of cemented my career in audience development was one question that Arthur Mitchell asked me while we were touring around the United States. We were in all the major cities. There were very few black people in the audience. So one day he turned to me and he said, Donna, where are the black people? I said, that's a good question. I don't know. So I started talking to the presenters, and they said, you know, we're trying to figure that out too. We're trying to understand how do we engage them to come and see classical ballets. So that started my whole campaign, all of the various techniques and strategies that I've developed over these past 45 years to engage people of color in all aspects of the arts. And so doing that, you know, for 9 years, and then I got a phone call from George C. Wolfe, who was then the producer at the Public Theater in New York. And George called and said, I heard about you. Can you come in? So I was so excited. It's like, George C. Wolfe called me, the producer at the Public Theater. He's Angels in America on Broadway, Color Museum, all these amazing accolades he had. And he just asked me, he said, you know, I've been here 3 months, and the audiences looks like a subway stop. No, he said the audiences are predominantly white, and I would like this place to look like a subway stop. How would you do it? So I said, well, I definitely know how to get black people into audiences, so I'm sure I can expand, you know, these tactics to other communities of color. And he said, great, thank you. So I thought, well, that was nice. You know, he picked my brain, okay. And then a week later, he called and said, when can you start? How many would you like in your new department, and what would you like to call it? So I just looked at the phone. I said, well, this must be what it's like to dream out loud, because this can impossibly happen, but it did. So for 9 years, I was able to work side by side with George C. Wolfe, really translating that vision of creating an audience that looks like a subway stop. So audience development is something that you know, have spent more than half of my life really focusing on. So I wrote my first book to document this, because so many people were asking me, how do you do it? And by this time, I was doing this on Broadway as well. And then I've also been teaching, because I feel it's really important that we develop our successors, as well as to make sure that whatever we feel is successful, we're in the classroom to advance those initiatives. So this is my 38th year teaching at New York University and Columbia University. And then, you know, in 2013, I got another phone call. You have to pick up the phone. That's where all this magic happens, and people call you. So I got another phone call from John Schreiber and Dave Rodriguez, who are the leaders at New Jersey Performing Arts Center in Newark, New Jersey. And I had worked with them at the Apollo when I was the marketing director there, and so they remembered my work. So they said, well, you know, we're out here in Newark, New Jersey, and the vice president of marketing has just left, and we would love to, if you could come out for just 3 months, interim, 3 months. We're going to do a national search, and that's all we need. 2 days a week. You can work on your other projects. I thought, wow, this is great. So I said, yes. So after the first month, John came in and asked me would I take the position. So I looked around, because I thought it was somebody else in the room. I said, I know he's not asking me to take this full-time job when I have my own company with 7 employees and contracts, but that's exactly what happened. So I talked with my family, I talked with my clients to see, you know, how this could really be a game changer just in terms of the field. You know, how can I help inform and impact the field? And so I accepted that position as vice president of marketing, but what it did not allow me to do was audience development, because there wasn't time. So that's when I really understood that this needs its own separate function. You know, it really can't just be something we squeeze in. And so I was able to, you know, navigate that world. And then I noticed that many people of color in Newark, New Jersey, were not coming inside of the Arts Center. And so I thought, we need to go to them, and we need to bring the art to them without the expectation that they're going to come and buy a ticket. But isn't the whole point to have an arts experience? And so I proposed to create the country's second community engagement department, and I became the vice president of that. And so we've been doing it ever since. I have raised my successor, and so I now consult at NJPAC, but we present over 200 community engagement events per year. We serve over 30,000 people just with those events. Has nothing to do with ticket buyers. And then, you know, after the murder of George Floyd, like many arts organizations in the country, we started to reflect on, well, what are we doing that really represents? We're building an inclusive environment, and that we're being as diverse as we can in all aspects of our business. And that's when I was asked to lead the DEI initiative. So I currently serve as a senior advisor of diversity, equity, and inclusion at New Jersey Performing Arts Center. And much of my consulting business is also teaching and leading workshops for that. So we're now in our 5th year, and I created, like Nataki talked about social justice, I created a social justice program called Standing in Solidarity. And every month I produce a panel and a film that touches upon social justice topics. So we have done over 50 of them
And we've served around 40,000 people who have come either in person or watched virtually. So my mission from law school has carried forward in many different ways, and I'm delighted to be here with all of you. Thank you.
My name is James Fuller. I'm the Audience Insight Manager at Ballet Austin. And first off, I just want to say how honored I feel to be on the stage with you guys. It's just amazing to hear what you've done. And I mean, Arthur Mitchell is just such a legend in our field, and it's just wonderful to hear the work that you've done there. I guess just a quick introduction to Ballet Austin. We're sort of long-term part of the Austin community. We were founded in 1956. We're located down on West 3rd Street. We perform at the Long Center, which is just across Lady Bird Lake. We have a professional company of 23 full-time dancers, as well as a professional training academy that operates at our studios there. We also have dance classes for adult dancers, and really people of any age can come in and enjoy those classes. We teach ballet, African hip hop, Pilates, lots of different types of dance. We also have a location up at the J that does young children's programs, as well as outreach and classes in the schools. So all these sort of different parts of our organizations work together, and I've been lucky enough to be a part of a lot of different aspects of Ballet Austin over the years. I joined the professional company in 2010 and was a professional dancer there up until just this last May. During that time, I became more and more aware that there was something really special, I think, happening in the sort of administrative side and how we were trying to reach out to audiences. First off, during the pandemic, when so many people were laid off, Ballet Austin really showed a really great commitment to us as dancers by keeping us on our contracts the whole time, even though we weren't able to do a single in-person performance that season. And after the pandemic, it was a big question: would audiences come back? Like, is this something that people are now so used to not being in person and coming back to the theater? But the good news was they came back in force. It was a beautiful thing to see. We had these sort of packed houses. Nutcracker did extremely well as our other productions. And just part of that was just being here in Austin, I think, having so much support in the community. And part of that was the work that Ballet Austin was doing. Prior to the pandemic, we'd worked with the Wallace Foundation to do a lot of research into our audiences and to trying to find why it was that people might feel uncomfortable coming to the ballet, or how we could make it a welcoming place that people knew that they could come to sort of cross that gap of unfamiliarity and really share that this is an art form that we love so much and we want to share and that you can really be a part of. And so that work is something I wanted to learn about, and I really wanted to understand what was happening on the side of reaching out. As a dancer, I had really no contact with that sort of outreach, marketing, sort of audience development side. Ballet Austin is an arts-first organization, so we really believe that the artistic director really is leading in terms of the programming, what we do each season, and then it's the job of the sort of marketing department and administration to sell those tickets and to make sure that it's accessible to the community and that we welcome people in. And so as a dancer, I hadn't really encountered that much. I just sort of knew that something good and interesting was happening and that there was sort of a lot of forward thinking there. And so I learned and tried to teach myself some SQL programming, getting ready to work with the database and figure out if I could help in those efforts. And this last August, I joined the administrative team at Ballet Austin as Audience Insight Manager, looking into trying to understand our audience and what their experience is and how we can make this the best experience for them and something that's really welcoming and open to our whole community here in Austin. And it's been a fascinating line of work. Interestingly, when I first got this job, my assumption was that my main interest or thing that I would be looking into is the real people, the people here in our audience. Unfortunately, a lot of the insight work that I've been doing over these last months has been the simple insight is this person who's bought a ticket actually a person, or are they a bot? Or are they someone pretending with some false identity, false address to buy a ticket from us? And so a lot of what I've been doing over these last 8 months has been really pushing back against ticket resellers, sort of colloquially called scalpers. And I think that's really, really important work in order to keep the arts affordable and accessible to people.
Amazing, thank you all. I have chills on this panel because all of the presenters are such amazing humans. I'll briefly introduce myself. So I'm faculty at University of Washington. I'll talk about that in a moment. But I'm also an arts journalist and an arts writer, and I've done that work for over a decade. I've written in Seattle for the Seattle Times, the South Seattle Emerald, which is a Black-founded newspaper. I've written for HowlRound, HowlRound, who's broadcasting us right now, Hyperallergic, LitHub, Variable West. And in 2022, I was a special project co-editor that started a series called Black Arts Legacies series that featured Black artists living and past in Seattle, including Cabby Mitchell, who was actually Pacific Northwest Ballet's first Black principal dancer, Cheryl West, who's an amazing Black playwright, Takia Ward, who made the Black Lives Matter mural, and the Negro Repertory Company, which was part of the WPA theater companies in the 1930s. I also am an arts advocate. I used to teach at Seattle U in the arts leadership program. I taught arts policy, and my first year teaching that in 2019, they changed the city council laws so like a bunch of people were running for city council that year. Long story short, I along with our class decided to start the Seattle Arts Voter Guide, where we emailed everyone running for city council in Seattle for their arts platform. And so that's continued, and I continue to run that. I'm also a Washington State Arts Commissioner. I'm on the Washington State Arts Commission, and it's interesting in that role, part of who I think my audience are my local representatives and senators, and asking them for money to fund the arts. But at UW, I'm assistant professor of theater history and performance studies. I have affiliations in art history and comparative history of ideas, and I do research broadly on experimental theater and performance that takes place in urban margins and relationships between contemporary performance practices, gentrification, and more broadly between art practices, race, public policy, and space. As part of my work at UW, I think about how infrastructurally to get resources to artists. So I run a research cluster that's a little bit of a mouthful called the Minoritarian Performance Research Cluster. But in that research cluster, I've been able to pay artists to come in and share their work. But I think about that primarily as paying artists. And then I teach classes including Drama 101, and I told Caritha that I proudly teach her book Living with Lynching to 200 students. And thinking about audiences, I teach this class, Drama 101, and I'm told every year in my annual review that that's the class that helps support the funding of our department. And so that's just interesting to think about being at a public institution. I teach courses including performance ethnography, and I want to just cite that course because it's a course where we observe culture and interview people. And one person I interviewed in my research is an artist named Ricardo Gamboa. And I want to bring them up because they gave me a definition of equity that I sit with. When we use this word equity, I'm like, what do we mean by it? And so they define equity as radical fairness. And I've added to that radical fairness that's conscious of systems and power and history that brings joy to all, especially minoritized people. And I also teach a course at UW. I teach an arts leadership course at UW. And so to close my intro, I wanted to share 3 kind of lessons from my arts leadership course that I think are relevant in this conversation on audiences and markets. The first, and this has been like glossed on a lot really beautifully by by many people this weekend, is this kind of particular economic condition of the arts, but especially theater. Many of you know Baumol and Bowen, William Bowen, 2 Princeton economists that in the 1960s wrote their book, Performing Arts, The Economic Dilemma. And their main thesis was that the economy of theater is very different from the economy of automobile manufacturing. Their argument is that because the product of theater is the process itself, it can never accumulate capital. And I have my students read this, and when we think about this especially in the Seattle tech frame, that in theater, for example, the product of theater involves the process of bodies on stage every night. Compare that to Bill Gates like building Microsoft Word once and selling it 1 billion times, and how theater like can't accumulate capital, but tech can, and what that means. And so that's just something to think about. A second thing that I think about, and I teach in my class, the Rand, I don't know what it's called, Rand organization, put something out, I think 20 years ago, about the values of the arts. And they have this little grid about intrinsic values, instrumental values, private and public. And so intrinsic values of the arts are things like joy, belonging, togetherness. And instrumental values are things like creative economy, health, higher math scores. And then public to private, so like private, intrinsic private, it's like joy. Instrumental public is like creative economy. And when I teach this to students, I ask them, if you were talking to your friend about your favorite piece of art, what value would you emphasize? And they almost always say intrinsic, private, or public. Like, I love this song because it brings me joy. I went to the theater and I felt like I belonged. And then I ask, if you were talking to a policymaker about the arts, what would you emphasize? And they always switch to instrumental. We have to support the arts because of the creative economy. And so I always am like, isn't that interesting? Why wouldn't you tell a policymaker that this work brings me joy? Why wouldn't you have that conversation? And then the third thing that I teach that I think is really, really relevant to this panel is Brett Egan and Michael Kaiser's The Cycle, a practical guide to managing arts organizations, many of you know, and also there's criticism of it, rightfully, but they have this model about how the arts are supported in the nonprofit industrial complex, which is you make great art, you aggressively market the art. That aggressive marketing produces a family of both people that see the works and funders, and those people fund the art. And that funding leads to great art. So it's art, marketing, audience, funding. And so I thought with our panel today, thinking about art, marketing, audience, funding would be really, really productive. So by way of my introduction, I want to turn it over back to our panelists, and I'll read some of the questions that they were prompted with as part of to open it up to them as part of their 6-minute response. So some of the questions are, what kinds of market forces dehumanize, exclude, or contribute to systemic inequalities in the performing arts? What kinds of markets have proven hospitable to specific ways of working in live performance? How might arts advocates and those with decision-making power in the arts strategically channel resources towards the manifestation of economic and cultural justice through their engagement with market forces? And how do you approach or perceive of audiences invested in live performance in light of these ever-changing market dynamics? So with that, I'll turn it back, and maybe we'll do the reverse boomerang, and we'll start with James.
Right. So to answer those questions about markets and audience, I think I'm going to return to sort of one of the last things I was talking about with ticket resale. And I'll maybe start with a story for that. So my retirement show was Sleeping Beauty last May, Mother's Day weekend. Beautiful show. A friend of mine called me, and she desperately wanted to come see my show, but she said the tickets were $600 and that she couldn't come see the show because she couldn't afford a $600 ticket. None of our tickets are $600. That is outrageous. If you're sending the best ticket, and for this next production we've come max 105, but we go from 20 to, we want to make this art form accessible to people. And the problem is, because ticket resellers, they're not actually putting on a show. They have no overhead. They have nothing that they're actually providing to society or paying for except their placement on the Google ranking, and what you have the search engine. When you type in Ballet Austin or Nutcracker, what pops up first? It's usually the resellers. And so that really is a huge barrier to people. If they want to come see the ballet and they Google Ballet Austin performance and they see that the tickets are $600, they'll feel that isn't for them. It's too expensive. They can't go see the ballet and that's the message that they get then. And that's so antithetical to what we want to do. And it's really important to us as sort of a nonprofit to push back against that, because if it were just about making sales, then it wouldn't really matter that much, since a sale is a sale. Hey, the ticket reseller is buying a ticket from us, so we get that same amount of money whether they resell it for $600 or $50, however much. But it's really not about that. We want this art form to be accessible to people, and we want them to know that they can come see the ballet for a reasonable price. And so also, if you do buy that $600, maybe that's the only arts you'll be able to see this year, if you've spent that much. And we'd want, instead of spending $600 and giving, 460 of it to a reseller and then only having the 40 come to the actual arts organization, we'd want them to know that they could have so much art, they could be participating in so much in our community for that amount of money. And so it's really important that we, first off, help to educate people about this really predatory practice. A lot of times people don't know that they've bought a ticket from a reseller, as they think they've bought it directly from us. So education is a big part of it. We also can enforce our terms and conditions, and so if we know that a ticket has been bought for the sort of purpose of scalping it, that we can refund that order and take the ticket back. So that's been a big, big push, and what I've been sort of working on for these last 8 months is to just figure out who are resellers in those purchases from us and refund those orders and take back the tickets and make sure that they can go to actual customers. And that's a scary thing for an arts organization to do, because that's a lot of money that you're just refunding out there to the world. And so it's required some bravery, and I've really appreciated the sort of support of the sort of administration of Ballet Austin. It really requires us working together as arts organizations to figure out this, what to do, how to deal with this, because I don't think we should accept this as normal or as an acceptable business practice. These people, whoever they are, buying and reselling these tickets are just purely predatory, and it's not even a good instance of markets working well, because people, if they could compare the prices fairly and they knew what they were looking at, they could see that our tickets, what our ticket price range is and what the scalpers are charging, and they would know that this is actually the better thing to buy. That's sort of a market functioning functioning better there. So I think we need to join together and really figure out how to push back against this industry and make sure that tickets remain affordable and that people know what's going on.
So the question about what kinds of markets have proven hospitable to specific ways of working in live performance. So what I have experienced is that when I think about the market, I think about the presenter, the producer, because that's who's creating the opportunity. The market is and then we have audiences. So, and also, I loved your circle. He talked about the art and the market.
Family.
Funding. Yeah. So I would just suggest pushing that funding a little earlier, only because it costs money to develop audiences. That's one point I wanted to make. Sometimes people think, oh, just a nice person and that'll be enough. Not at all. Audience development we want nice people, but audience development is a major component of marketing. And marketing costs money, and so does audience development. So there's definitely a myth that it's a soft initiative, and it's not. In many instances, it may even be more. And so, we definitely need the financial resources. So where I find it to be hospitable and to be successful for live performances is when you have an environment where a producer or executive director, artistic director that understands that this is an investment in a community that we believe in. So that's just fundamental. And then with that investment comes research and resources. We have to understand who they are. How do people come to live performance? Not everyone comes the same way. People need different incentives, maybe different times of the year, and definitely different kinds of product. Sometimes presenters think that because they love the project so much, everyone else must too, but they don't. I've worked on shows that I absolutely did not like, and I was very transparent about that. I said, I know this is my responsibility, but I actually don't like this work. So it's a challenge then to engage audiences for something that you may not necessarily be passionate about. So I had to find ways to create my lane of passion regardless of what the work may look like. And I did that by making it more institutional. So I believe that's where the success is, not show by show or event by event, but by the institution's relationship with the community. And that way, so sometimes you may see something that you didn't really care for, but you love the way they treated you when you came in the building. You love the smiles of the house staff. They had the snacks and the drinks that you like. And that could be your memory. And so I learned that a long time ago, working at the Public, when so many of those shows, I came from a ballet background, and then I immersed into theater working with George. So I love Shakespeare. That was fabulous. I think Shakespeare is the bomb because Shakespeare touches on every aspect of a person's life. And when it's produced, so much of the work that Nataki did with making it really multicultural and embracing, where people are today, it's incredibly accessible. So Shakespeare's I've always been a #1 fan of that. But sometimes there have been other works that, I just kind of struggled with, well, what does this mean? So I didn't worry about that. I focused on what's the experience. So how do you leave your home? Do you need directions to come to the theater itself? What happens when you walk in the door? What happens when you go to the box office? Who gives you your ticket? Are they smiling? Do they look at you? Do you get eye contact? And then does the house staff, when they're taking you to your seat, are they escorting you? Or are they just flinging the program that, and point down there, the 5th row, and squeeze in the middle? So those are things that I could control. And I find that that's what creates that hospitable environment, particularly when you're looking at an institution that's presenting work over a period of time. So at the Public Theater, that was my focus. Every year we produce about 9 to 10 different plays. And some of them, were really challenging. And some of them I had to figure out how to understand. The playwright, Susan Laurie Parks, she's a fantastic writer. And her first play that she did at the Public Theater, I just didn't understand. It was called the America Play. I did not understand that play. I was like, well, I know I'm not dumb. I went to law school. But this, I don't understand. What are we trying to say? So I was able to bribe 10 of my friends to come and see it. And they said, if this is what you're doing, don't call us anymore. I said, okay. So now I think this is an issue. So I went to George and I said, I don't understand this play. I don't know how to engage people. I don't know how to build an audience for it. And he said, don't worry. Susan Laurie Parks is one of the country's greatest playwrights, and we're going to be doing her work. So I translated that to mean you have time to figure it out. So I said, I need to get to know her. Because at the end of the day, the art is about the heart. And when we make this heart-connected work, we can transcend all kinds of things. And so I said, Miss Susan Laurie Parks, can we go to lunch? Because I really need to understand, what are you saying in your writing? She was like, yes. So we went to lunch. We got to know each other. At that time, in Lower Manhattan, Barnes & Noble had opened up, and they had a community affairs director. So I asked her, could I start to bring in playwrights who could just read from their scripts? And Susan Laurie Parks was my first one. NYU is 2 blocks away, so I started taking her to some of the classes. So I started to think about who could be these target audiences and taking her there so that they could see her, feel her, and start to understand what is it that she's really writing about. I took her to churches, particularly in March for Women's History Month, and I would ask, ministers to salute her, this incredible playwright that's doing brilliant work. So we have to use all the tools and think about where are people. And that's how we can build our audience as we go to where they are. So her second play was much easier. I think it was Venus Hottentot. And at least it was a story, not the most positive one that many people said to me. They said, why did she write about that? Venus Hottentot was about a South African woman who had a very uniquely arranged behind. It was very large. And she was put into a circus. And just lived a very miserable life and died in Paris. And Susan Laurie Parks wrote about her life in just this really fascinating way, but it was a story. So then the third play was In the Blood. In the Blood was about a woman with 5 children who lived under a bridge, and she killed one. So we're like, okay, we get it. So people were starting to say, okay, she writes about kind of dark things, but they're interesting. And so then I started to say, well, how can we play with this? So there are 2 things I did with In the Blood. Sylvia's Restaurant is a very famous soul food restaurant in Harlem. So I asked, and I had a relationship with them from Dance Theater of Harlem. So I called them. I said, when I'm down at the Public Theater, could you prepare these barbecue dinners that I could sell for $10 during the intermission of one of our plays? It had nothing to do with the play. It had everything to do with people feeling welcome. Recognizing, oh yes, we know Sylvia's and we definitely love her barbecue. And so we did that, and that really helped to bring in the Black community for something that was familiar. Even when they couldn't quite connect with the work itself, they could with the experience. And then the play was around Valentine's Day. And so I just said, you know what, let's make this a singles, mixer where people can come and meet their true love. That's how, now, I didn't know anything about this. These are things that we're just creating because we're fearless and because the art drives you. And so, I went down to the props department, got some of the rugs and put them out on the floor, got the lamps and made the room, atmosphere lighting, and invited people. We went around in the neighborhood. We went to some of the stores and businesses and gave them flyers and said, you all come, it's 6 o'clock before the show, and you're going to meet somebody you really like. We had no idea how this would work. But, this is the arts. You're fearless when we work in the arts. There is no fear. And so we did that. And people came. They had fun. We had wine. It was great. So that becomes the memory. When we're developing audiences, it's all about, well, what happened when I went? How did I feel? How was I treated? So those are some of the examples of some of the ways where I think it's hospitable to specific live performances. Thank you.
I just wish every theater had you as the head of, oh my goodness. Everything you said, I was like, why couldn't I have worked with you? And I mean that, why couldn't I have worked with you? Because I'm actually going to be focusing on market forces that dehumanize, exclude, and contribute to systemic inequities in the performing arts. And I'm focused on this one particular thing that I inherited when I became the artistic director of the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. It's called the Audience Development Manifesto. It was implemented in 2010. It was this bold commitment to making theater more accessible and inclusive. It was trying to break down these barriers that forced people, that caused people not to be able to feel like they could come to the theater, focusing on race, income, age, and disability. OSF adjusted ticket prices, they expanded casting choices, they built stronger connections with underrepresented communities, at least that's what they espoused. And all the publications talked about how amazing this was, except for, I went back and reread the New York Times article that talked about this, just to prepare for this. And I was like, there's a little snarky snark in this, this article that's sort of telling, and what's inherent in the article is like, can this happen? I mean, really? If you really think about it, really. And over the course of the article, he gets Bill Rausch, who is being interviewed for it, to talk about what the real barriers were to that work. So it's originally developed as a marketing program by marketing genius Freda Casillas. And by the time I arrived at OSF, it was in real jeopardy. One of the things I did, and this is just as the pandemic was descending, so even before the theater was forced to close, I got my hands finally on the document and got to really focus on it. And there's one paragraph that I was like, oh. We value every single, it's the section called Foundational Principles of Audience Development. By the way, you can look it up. If you type in Audience Development Manifesto, you can find it online. It's still on. We value every single member of our current and future audience. People who have developed a love for the arts have traditionally been and will continue to be OSF's core audience. We need to make an extra effort to invite targeted groups of people who are not coming here already. We are not displacing, but rather adding to our core audience. It's a dog whistle. It tells you exactly how it was implemented. Rather than structurally shifting how the theater engaged with and prioritized different audiences, it functioned as a more symbolic gesture, celebrated publicly, but not deeply integrated into the organization's operational, financial, artistic decision-making. And this lack of real structural commitment left the institution vulnerable to backlash, similar to what we're experiencing as a nation right now, from legacy audiences when efforts to expand access and inclusion began to take hold. The inability of OSF at the time to decenter its core audience in a meaningful and strategic way resulted in an audience that felt destabilized and also uninvited, rather than invited into shared work around equity. And while the manifesto was lauded for its progressive ideals, it never really prepared its existing audiences to share the space. many of whom had historically occupied a central and powerful role in the institution. So you can't create this thing as a parallel. You actually have to center it. And so when I got to OSF, and one of the reasons why I came was because of the Audience Development Manifesto. And what it promised was there's a platform, a foundation that's already been laid for the possibilities, right, that I came with. But I faced an audience as I began to sort of focus on what my vision was, which was to put the artist at the center. I faced an audience that was traumatized by the idea of losing their dominance rather than being equipped to embrace how a new vision shared the space. So one of the things I really believe is that the theater subscriber or membership model prioritizes historically wealthy white older audiences, as we know, who have been long-term financial supporters. These audiences have outsized influence on programming, leadership, and institutional decision-making. And let me say something. I remember having this conversation with, it was one of those donor meetings, that artistic directors are so inclined to spend 97% of your life doing. And this one man was describing this moment where he experienced this sort of deep and profound being moved in this way. And he described this moment where Willy Loman's speech and how it really changed him. He said, can you imagine being in a room full of middle-aged white men all crying at the same time? And I said, yeah, so I want to do the Willy Loman of this generation. And he looked at me like I had 19 heads. Like, what? No, there's no, they should just see Death of a Salesman. So even the notion that you might shift towards the audience that you're trying to bring, and that he might also be able to engage in the same way was like, oh, you must have lost your natural mind. Resistance to institutional change. The theater's dominant audience had been conditioned as the central stakeholders, not one of the many important stakeholders. And so when they sought to expand audience access, existing patrons perceived this as an attack on their status rather than an effort to broaden engagement. And then as OSF attempted to shift towards a more inclusive audience model, a significant portion of the legacy audience withdrew financial support and stopped attending. And this is something that it's not just OSF that experienced this. Any theater in the United States right now that had in the last 15 years engaged in this way lost a significant portion of their audience, unless you're looking at some of those theaters that are inside of New York City. So outside of New York City, in the regional theater movement landscape, there's this focus on centering legacy audiences, and there's a real fear of removing those audiences. Meanwhile, what happens in the house is you have so many of these instances where you invite a new person into the space and they have this really negative experience, either sitting next to an audience member. In one of the theaters that I ran, there were several instances of assault where young people were smacked on the back of the head or on the shoulder for doing something that a legacy audience member felt was untoward and unnecessary in a theater. I was once told by a legacy audience member, well, it's just that young people don't know when to laugh. And I was like, oh, well, how do you know when to laugh? Is there like some sort of manual that you get before you come? Did you read something on the website that was like, laugh right here after he says, look, is there a laugh? Like, what are you talking about, right? And, that's why some of those moments with donors was so exciting for me, because they could not imagine as the donor class that what they said was not the truth about what was happening in those spaces. And then you have this other thing about, for OSF in particular, the barriers are like, cost too much, it's too far away, who has the time to spend 4 days away? Now, Audience Manifesto was originally inclined towards bringing in the local audience. So there was a significant number of, a really high number of people in the Latina population across Oregon that had been there historically. And they had been historically uninvited into the space. So part of the reason why Fred invented it was, how do I just even get the people down the street to come into the space? But the notion, when you start to say out loud, I want to bring these people into the space, what I was told when I was talking about, how you create an equitable space for your audience was, I feel like I'm being disinvited into the space. That this space is no longer for me. It's a zero-sum game. If it's for them, it's not for me. You understand? And so I actually was encountered by a number of people who were really worried about how they might share the armrest. Really, they wanted to be around the people that they knew. And then you have this last thing, which is the rise of the billionaire class. So this idea of oligarchy has been penetrating and growing within the cultural landscape. And we know it because many of us who work in the cultural landscape spend our lives in these conversations with these people. And the problem is that as wealth consolidates at the top, philanthropy funding models and decision-making in the art becomes increasingly controlled by an elite few. Literally, it becomes this pay to play. I gave you $1 million or $4 million, and therefore the programming should benefit my interests. Right? And I remember saying to, at one of my theaters, I won't name which one, I remember saying to one of my managing directors, yeah, you could probably go get $1 million from that person, but it's going to cost you $2 million on the back end. Because what they were purchasing is stasis. How do we keep things the same? So billionaire donors increasingly function as gatekeepers of culture, determining which projects. They often favor institutions that reflect their own social circles. And it creates unspoken veto power where theaters must balance progressive audience development efforts with the risk of alienating high net worth donors who resist change. So you get this audience manifesto, it's visionary. And it ran into the limitations of an entrenched market system that privileged historical audiences over future growth. And you have that coupled with the fact that many of our playwrights are writing into the zeitgeist that actually exists beyond that, that 1% wall, right? And so what I also experienced in the issues with marketing is that you had a playwright who was writing a play, and you knew the audience was outside of the walls of the castle, basically, right? In one of my institutions, I actually literally had somebody say, "Oh, I'm sorry I'm late for this meeting. I didn't know which door to use," right? And so that significant barrier actually over time causes the two things that are happening across the American theater, which is you have this dwindling base, and you have an ineffective way of connecting with people from the outside. They don't know how to come into the place because they don't know where the door is. And once they do they know what they're going to experience once they're in there? And once they know that, how do they begin to engage regularly? And my thing was let's just shift the invitation, right? I'm going to invite you. You are the reason why this theater is open. I want you to come, you and your grandma and your auntie and your sister friend. I want everybody to come together. I remember saying to my legacy audience, you know what I really need you to do is I need you to bring somebody who you think wouldn't normally come to the theater. Bring them with you and sit them down next to you. Again, that looked like I had 19 heads. Because the notion of engaging in that space with somebody who might see you be moved or cry or laugh in the wrong place, and these are real human issues. And then the last thing I'll say about these barriers. So, hi, I'm a Black woman leader in an industry where there are so few Black women leaders. And other leaders of color, women leaders of color. And so I was also fighting against biases against Black women. So I show up in a room and you have to sort of get past your biases first, and everybody's doing it, doesn't matter who you are, because white supremacy is the water and not the shark, right? And these biases cast Black women as too demanding, too aggressive, and too disruptive. And too often I had to re-educate and reorient marketing teams towards inclusion and radical honesty and authentic storytelling, like my guru Donna here, while also managing the pushback against those shifts. Rather than supporting my leadership, these systems forced me to fight for my ideas to be seen and understood. Many marketing teams were built and entrenched, and they reinforced outdated systems. So I'm one of those people who believes in systems change. This isn't working. Let's figure out what we're going to do to replace it. And I'll give us, 8 years to make this happen. And when you have a system that is so entrenched, the marketing team they wouldn't even know what the show is. They would be like, oh, the title doesn't sound right. That title, I can't sell the title. Well, you don't even know what the art is, And there was rarely an infrastructure in place to translate anything new, anything different, anything tangible, because the system was so entrenched. You end up fighting for how do you use this face to market for this organization? And people were like, we don't know. And I was like, great, let's learn together. And they were like, that's not how it works. That's not how the system works. We're not going to learn that together. There's a system that supports a certain kind of leader. I say all this to say, when we talk about dehumanize and exclude, we have to think about the entire system of marketing and what it really means, right? You have to have a willing leader who's like, let's change everything, right? Please tell me what you're going to do to get people in here. George Wolf saying, where are all the black people, right? And then you also have to have a space you have to have constituencies across your theater that can say, I'm so down for you that I want this to happen. I'm with you to make this happen. And I trust that your vision is going to allow it to happen, because I'm actually interested in sitting and sharing my arm rests with somebody I've never met before.
Thank you so much. I'm having chills with this conversation. I wanted to say something administrative and then also say something that's on my heart a little bit, that may be a little bit of a third rail. Administratively, I wanted to just say that our panelist, Kevin Moriarty, is unfortunately able to be here due to a family emergency, so I just wanted to honor him in this space. But I also wanted to say something that I've been feeling, and I told Nataki, I'm a huge fangirl of Nataki, and I went to OSF 3 years ago, and I felt deep anti-Blackness in Ashland, and it's something I've been thinking about for a long time, also with the word market. We can think about the slave auction, and a lot of other people have said this. I think, and many other scholars have argued this, that violence against Black women is foundational to our country. Violence against Black women is foundational to our country. So what does it mean to be a Black woman leader? What does it mean to think about who is centered and decentered in markets and audiences? This is something I thought about, and I'll just say it, when both the Washington Post and the LA Times, their editorial board wanted to endorse Kamala Harris and the billionaire owners didn't. And I connected that to this longer genealogy again. Why is it that there's foundational violence against Black women? What is the symbol that Black women have? What is the work that Black women have done in our society? And what does that mean for the arts? So I just wanted to put that out there, because it's on my heart at this moment. Thank you. Yes. And I just wanted to share a little bit some of the examples I wanted to share of marketing from markets and audiences from Seattle that are, to me, examples of productive or interesting examples of marketing and audience building. I wanted to share 2 examples not from Seattle, and then a bunch of examples from the Seattle region. So I lived in Chicago in the 2010s, and actually my parents got married in Chicago, so I have a lot of family in Chicago as well. And when I was there, I attended and I later interviewed the founders of something called the Chicago Home Theater Festival. That was around from 2012 to 2017, and it was a bunch of artists that got together and was like, we're not served by the city. We don't see theater in our neighborhoods. They actually were inspired by, I'm forgetting I think his name was Philip Wong from San Francisco, an artist who said, quote unquote, fuck institutions, excuse my French. And so they got together and they started to produce theater and other forms of arts in people's homes all throughout Chicago. They did this for 5 seasons. It was every season they had it in 60 different homes. I was talking to, I'm forgetting your name, the lovely person who works in Chicago, in East Garfield Park, in Pilsen, in neighborhoods that traditionally don't have arts, but of course do. So I wanted to share that example, and they just did it. They did it. They had I forgot what they called, a zero economy thing, where they sold the tickets, they paid for costs and gave the rest of the money to the artist. And the second model I want to share about when we think about audiences, I lived in St. Louis for 2 years. Actually, that's where my parents met. I love St. Louis. It's my favorite U.S. city. In St. Louis, almost all of the museums are free. And they're not free of oh, can you give us a donation? They're free, you just walk in. And it makes for such a different experience in a city to just walk in an institution. When Kehinde Wiley did his portraits of Black St. Louisans, you just walked in and you saw, guess what? You saw tons of Black people there. There weren't the questions of why aren't X going to Y, because it was just free. And so I think about that all the time where, and I'll talk about examples from Seattle, which I love, and there's been great conversations about cultural access, and also I'm like, why can't we make art museums free? Myself, as someone who's affiliate faculty in art history, I only go to Seattle Art Museum when there's free Thursdays because I cannot afford regularly to pay $30 for a ticket. So I want to give you some examples of thinking about audiences and marketing in the Seattle region. And last year, King County, which is the county of 2.2 million in which Seattle exists, named after MLK, passed this legislation called Doors Open. This is a work of advocates for over 10 years, but in brief, it gives $100 million a year for the arts in King County. And it's run through the King County Arts Agency called For Culture, and they're expressly committed to racial equity. And I'll give an anecdote from this. I was doing arts advocacy last month in Olympia, Washington. I ran into one of my former grad students who is, as typical arts administration, like works for a theater company, but also it like is on the board of an organization and volunteers for another organization. And those three organizations all have received grant money from Doors Open. So it's $100 million for the arts every year in King County, just put into effect, and it's immediately going to arts organizations. I also want to name that in Seattle Office of Arts and Culture is funded through the admissions tax in Seattle, which is a tax on for-profit entertainment. There's a really curious loophole that excludes male sports. So I'm a proud Storm member. I love the national champions WNBA team Seattle Storm, but the Seattle Storm and the Seattle Reign as women's sports, actually their ticket sales go to fund the arts in Seattle, but the Mariners, the Seahawks, and the Kraken do not. Which is interesting, and you can think about the Office of Arts and Culture gets around $10 to $20 million a year, but what it could get if we taxed men's sports. But what they do with that funding, including public art, art space, equitable buildings, civic artists as well. And then one other program from the Office of Arts and Culture is something called Hope Corps, which is modeled off of WPay Artists, but is giving artists a living wage to do kind of public works projects. And then I wanted to shout out two organizations in Seattle that are really thinking about the audiences and their markets. The first is Wanawari. Wanawari is a Black arts organization founded in 2019 in a former fourth generation Black home in the Central District, which was traditionally kind of the African American Red Line neighborhood in Seattle. And they do this amazing fundraiser every year called Walk the Block. So instead of the kind of traditional fundraiser in a ballroom, they invite the entire neighborhood. It's essentially free, but you can pay a ticket from $5 to $200, and you walk around the block and you experience neighborhood arts. And they do that as their fundraising model. And I just think it's such an amazing fundraising model and thinking about audiences and markets that completely flips our like archetypes of like the really tasty 3-course dinner and like unlimited wine, but instead being with your community. And the other organization I want to name in Seattle is called Teen Ticks. They're an organization dedicated to youth access to the arts. And so if you're a teen in Seattle, you sign up with them and you get free and $5 tickets to almost any arts engagement in Seattle. So all the art museums, all the theaters through them get these kind of low-cost ways of entry. And so I just want to give these examples of like what Seattle is doing around thinking about audiences and markets through policy and through leadership. So with that, I think let's turn to manifestos in the time that we have, and if we have time after that, we'll open it up to Q&A. So we're going to close with our illustrious, amazing panelists who as you all were talking, I'm getting chills, and also this is like a master class, and I'm learning so much for you. So I'm deeply grateful for the work you're doing, your expertise, and what we're learning from you and with you. Our last prompt is for have us each to dream. And so I guess I'll just briefly start, and then maybe I'll hand it to James, and we'll kind of end with Nataki and this beautiful boomerang. And I'll just say the thing I'm dreaming about is an idea that I heard in 2011 when I started, a year after I started grad school at a conference. I think it's Social Theory, Politics, and the Arts, a cultural policy conference. And there was someone named Michael Wilkerson who presented an idea that was basically like a nationwide entertainment tax. A nationwide, like what would it mean if we had a 1% tax on all for-profit entertainment and what we could use with that funding? And so I want to put that out here because I think that when we dream about audiences and markets, and I think when we dream in arts infrastructure and arts policy, given our current infrastructure, it's often very limited, given how we're often forced to cut down. What might it mean to dream through abundance? And what might it mean to think about abundant sources? And so to me, this dream is how might we tax what could be an abundant source to further support all of us in the work that we do. And with that, I'll hand it to James.
I guess I would like to sort of echo that idea of abundance, that there's just such a richness of culture and of beauty and in dance. There's just so much there, and I love it so deeply, and I want it to be something that people can come see and that they can feel comfortable and that they have just a wonderful life-giving experience from the very beginning all the way through as they get to the door. What you were talking about with welcoming people into theater is so important. Even where they park, how they get it through the door, how they access the tickets, all of those things. I want all of those to be a good and deep and easy thing so that people can come and experience the art and experience art that sometimes is really challenging and sometimes gives you a transcendent experience, sometimes moving into a connection to history, that I want to build and develop audiences very inclusively so that everyone has access who wants to come to a Ballet Austin performance can go and do that.
So I love dreaming. I do it a lot. And so I love the question. And definitely the foundation is abundance. One of the things that I've really enjoyed working this past year with the Whitney Museum of American Art, it's based in Manhattan. And they asked us, the contract is for audience development. And they had an exhibition, Edges of Ailey, which was just magnificent. It was magnificent. On so many ways, Alvin Ailey's career and his art impacted so many aspects of the art. But what was so great for my team is that we had abundance to engage audiences. And frankly, it was the first time that I've had that level of generosity. From giving us 2,000 complimentary tickets to use every month, to having, we had the agency to be able to invite all kinds of different vendors to sell their products at the Whitney and to have them embedded in their merchandising campaign. So it wasn't just for that one time. It's now they're part of that whole ecosystem. For us having, they have an event called Free Friday Night, and we took over those, and we had a Harlem Salutes, Edges of Ailey, and we invited all kinds of different Harlem-based culture groups. We had a DJ. It was on fire. People were dancing like this would be the last time they ever danced in their lives. And DJ Stormin' Norman has a great following. So many of his followers came downtown, which had never been there before, ever. They hadn't been invited. But with him being there, they had over 7,000 people there. And the house staff said this was great, but it was a lot. I said, we understand. So we have to build capacity so everybody can enjoy. So when I think about what I'd love to see in these art spaces, it's people dancing. The joy, just that kind of joy that I was invited. So one, I belong. I don't have to worry about what do I have to do to get in. Do I have to look a certain way? Do I have to know someone? No, I was invited. So having that and that be the norm, not just because we're doing this once or twice, but that becomes the culture of that organization, that everyone that's coming there, they're dancing and joy. That's what I dream of in the spirit, of abundance. And at the same time, we're taking those experiences to various communities. So what if I don't want to come? That's fine. We're going to be in your area in a month. We'll be there in 2 weeks. What would you like us to do? And so when I see both audience development and community engagement as bookends to building audiences, that's the real success. And I think that's where some organizations are going, but it's going to take some time to realize that the metrics for success are not always ticket sales. The metrics can be people dancing. And what's wrong with that? And so I'd like us to just keep expanding how we evaluate what does audience development look like. It is definitely not limited to ticket sales. But I believe the more that we can embed arts and cultural experiences in our hearts and lives, the less we will want to be destructive, violent, angry. Because we all know the power of the arts to heal. So just imagine if we can just wear this blanket 24/7. Dreaming about that.
I love that dream so much. I have a few dreams, and granted, it's not easy to dream right now, right? Because of where we are in the world. But I was told once by somebody who's really important to me that there's a kind of pendulum, right? So you also have to dream so that the pendulum can keep moving, right? So I will lend myself to this idea of dream. But you know, one of the things I really do dream about is I believe we are at a catalyzing moment. I believe that the attack on arts and culture started at least a decade ago, if not in the 80s. I believe that we are coming closer to whatever that culminating event is. And I believe that we need to prepare another generation of artists, either through educational spaces like this, or you know, community arts centers, or public school play opportunities to engage with art as ceramics, or you know, live arts, or whatever, that we need to prepare them that they are going to be the ones to create new systems. So I'm a generation that inherited the systems, right? So my parents fought in the civil rights movement. They were very active. My dad led the San Francisco State Strike. And so what I was told when I was a kid is like, what you do is, so we did all this work so that some of the work you wouldn't have to do. But you're gonna have to do some work, and this is what you're gonna do. You're gonna infiltrate these systems. We're gonna embed you with this idea of service, so you're always gonna be at service. You're gonna infiltrate the systems, and then you're gonna create opportunities for other people to come inside these systems. But we didn't talk about, and then you might change them a little bit, right? Because you're gonna have to augment them in order for you to even be there, right? But we didn't talk about replacing the systems. And so the dismantling of some of these systems is actually, I think, integral to a future that includes art. Because we like to say it's gonna happen no matter what, right? But it may not be funded. And so what is that, right? Right now, the arts in several states is being pitted against the unhoused population. Oh, we can't pay for this art here because you know, and they're not actually giving any kind of resource to either group, right? But my thing is like, people who are unhoused need art, right? Everybody needs art. So how do you create a system that engages people despite their circumstance, and also because of their circumstance? And so when I think about the work that I did with One Nation, One Project, and what drew me to it was this idea that you could pull together public health, federally funded health centers, artists, you know, like municipalities, everybody could sit at the table and try to figure out ways of moving things forward. But I think the biggest lesson was so many of those communities were already engaging in that way. And that didn't matter if it was in a really tiny rural community in Edinburgh, Texas, or all the way, you know, like in Chicago, where we had two organizations that were working with us. It didn't matter where it was. You know, people were really committed to using art as one of the many tools in an arsenal that was necessary to help evolve their communities and help them become healthier in all the ways that are necessary. And so I think instead of saying to another generation of people, I'm going to teach you all these things about these systems that are here, and then you have to figure out how you fit, and you have your salad days, and like, you know, try to starve a little bit, and then be cut out of the system because you can't afford to starve in the same way that somebody who has a trust fund can starve. Why not get that generation of artists to think about new systems and how we might shift these systems? So that's what I'm dreaming about, is a version of this that I probably won't benefit from, but I certainly am trying to create enough path for that to happen.
Amazing. So we have about 15 minutes left. I would love to do a little Q&A, but before we do so, this is a method from Indigenous scholar Eve Tuck, where she invites folks to turn to each other first. So find someone in the audience, maybe you know them, maybe you don't, maybe they're near your elbow or behind or in front of your shoulder. Introduce yourself and maybe share something you found interesting about what we talked about, a question you have, something. I did a training with Pig Iron Theater Company in Philadelphia 2 years ago. They talk about the heat. Where's the heat for you in our conversation? I'm going to give you about 3 or 4 minutes, and then we'll have a good 10 minutes left for Q&A. All right? Thank you all.
Love that. You are amazing. Like, you are so. Oh, I'm gonna buy your book. Like oh my god. No, you better. Oh my yes. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love what you said. This is a little passionate about. I told James, but my partner and I, we want to start a piano bar. That's like our life goal in life. But what you said about, it's giving me chills about like not ticket sales, but people dancing. Like that's it, right? Like if you go into whatever, like how many people are dancing in this? Like that's just so. Thank you. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you for your wisdom.
You should be teaching marketing.
Yes. Yes. I literally was thinking that. I'm like, why are you not teaching? Yeah. I mean, not why you, but like, you know, yeah.
Because they said that they could not. Yeah. It's one of those days where you go. Well, we'll see. You know.
I'm going to give folks one more minute of conversation. We're going to come back together. And I'd love to use this last 10 minutes of our session just to hear from folks. And if possible, I would, because it's a beautiful reduced tone in the audience. Everyone is looking beautifully gray to black in a very beautiful way. So folks can maybe say their name and anything else about themselves as they ask a question, just so we can add you to this conversation. Who has a question? I love this moment. It's so great.
They answered the questions themselves.
Yeah, it's like it's
fabulous.
Todd.
I don't know. My name's Todd London.
Thanks, Todd.
We were just talking over here. This is incredibly moving panel. And I'm remembering in some research we did with new play production and the lives of playwrights, my colleague Tori Bailey, who was running the Theater Development Fund in New York, said that the moment everything switched was when audience development departments became marketing departments, at which moment it seemed that marketing could solve all the problems, and communities were defined by ticket buyers. So I'm seeing you shake your heads. You're like the guru of this, Donna, but I wonder if you agree, and how we turn that back. Some of it is simply about language, and then defining that language, and then acting on that definition. But is that accurate? Is that?
Yes, I agree with you. You know, there's a tremendous pressure that marketing directors have, and that's to generate revenue. And that doesn't often give space to experiment on how do I develop audiences. So even if you're given that, it's for that one show, you've got maybe 2 months, and does your team have the capacity to do that? And so what we have to do as arts administrators, we have to keep developing the field with people who have the skills to be able to do audience development. It's not something that you just wake up and are able to do. There has to be a fundamental passion and love for play, to be creative, and to be a warrior. And not everyone has those muscles. Some people just want a job. And so marketing departments have tremendous pressure. They have got to hit that revenue goal. And where is there the opportunity is, well, what about this community over here? Well, who's going to do it? And then who cares? And so I feel that we've missed a generation in training, like my generation. You know, the artist development kind of evolved out of the civil rights movement, you know, where there was this whole desire that started in the 60s, the 70s to fund multicultural arts organizations. And it was an extension of what had been happening in the civil rights movement, which was great. And then, you know, commercialization came about, many other things to kind of make that less a priority. But during that period, there were people who were really devoted to that, like Mickey Shepard, you know, at BAM, and, you know, some other really key people. But then who's next? Who's next? If we don't make these efforts generational, you have these big gaps. And so then the aspiration of success looks like I make my revenue goals, or we have, you know, 200,000 followers on social media. And that's what people are using for their metrics, as opposed to, you know, we just engaged this new community. I'm so excited about it. I don't even know anybody there, but we're going. You know, we're going to make this happen. And then getting that buy-in from leadership to support the vision of someone who may want to do that. So in order to turn it around, we have to have these conversations, and we have to talk about the economic impact. Let's just talk about this as good for business. You know, forget the moral compass, forget that this is the right thing to do. This is good for business. And so if we can make that shift, you know, fundamentally, so you have to surround yourself with allies. You have to get the people who can help these conversations, find people on your board, find leaders in the community, form task force. That's what I've done. I've created many advisory councils and task force who can speak, you know, with authority, with gravitas, so that they're heard. But that's what we do when we fight for the arts. So I will be looking to you to see how you're going to make some changes.
I also wonder if it's the same as going back to something,
or if it's looking for what the next generation, because if audience development is an outcome of the sort of multicultural movement across the theater, which, you know, of course, as you move through evolution, lets you know what the problems of one thing might be, the consequences of that choice. So what is the new thing that actually meets the demands and the needs of a new generation? How do you create a container where a new generation can actually create something that is more reflective of them and what they need? Because it may not be audience development. It might be something completely different. And so I think you have to know that there was this multicultural movement that led to audience development. And so you have to teach that. And then you have to also give the license to another generation of people to be like, so based on where we are right now, you know, our president is now the chair of the board of the Kennedy Center. So what would you create to develop an audience in this current framework where the NEA guidelines have shifted? I can only laugh because I read that thing and I was like, oh, that's what it is. Okay, cool. I don't know anybody who meets this criteria, but that's cool. I'm glad I don't know any theaters that do that, you know, or organizations at all that function that way. I'm glad I'm not aligned with that. But so how do you create something that is more inclusive? You know, that's the task, is you actually have to give people license to dream forward and figure it out. And get over this idea that somehow this agenda, somebody should have prepared this for us. How come we have to do the work to change it? Because you do. You do have to do the work to change it. That's your job. If you want it to be different, it's you.
We do it with joy.
Yes.
I'm determined. Insert that joy wherever we are.
And we dance about it. And we dance about it.
Maybe one more question from the audience. I see the... Yeah, great. Thank you so much.
Gosh, thank you all so much for this incredible conversation. I'm wondering what would happen if we flip the conversation just a little bit so that we've talked a lot about what arts organizations can be doing in this case, but as an audience member, you know, Nataki, I loved what you said about, you know, when you went to your audience, your legacy audiences, for example, and said, bring someone with you who wouldn't come. What other things can audiences be doing to support the vision of an equitable arts infrastructure?
So one of the things I find so interesting about the theater is that it becomes, I don't know, maybe this is something that it's always been, but I feel like I was like in my 30s when I discovered it's pass-fail. You know, I can see 7 in a row of the worst films that have ever been made, right? And be like, oh, well, you know, I just didn't like it, right? But theater's pass-fail. Oh, I took the time and I'm in this space and I didn't like it, right? And so I think as people who experience art, it can no longer be pass-fail. You have to teach your children that it can't be pass-fail, that you actually have to be able to move through these spaces. You have to be able to sit down in your mind with the Susan Laurie of the moment and engage in why something exists in this way and how it might penetrate you. Now, that is often co-opted, especially where equity issues are concerned, right? Well, how come you don't just cross the aisle and sit next to people who have called you all kinds of names, right? If you could just cross that aisle, that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is how do you create an opportunity for yourself to engage in something that is new and different for you? And expand yourself a little bit more, right? There's an opportunity to expand your empathy in those moments, or also just ignite your anger, you know? But there is an opportunity, and I think, especially for legacy audience members, come off it. There's an opportunity here, and if you've only ever been taught to reflect on yourself on the stage in a narcissistic, you know, navel-gazing kind of way. Oh, this is like me, and I'm like this, and that's me, and I see myself in it, and I, right? And you don't even have like an ounce of the ability to do what I often have to do in most theaters, which is witness somebody else's experience. Then you are the problem. You really are. You got to shift that for yourself. You got to be like, oh, I actually am going to spend this year only going to see and experience the kind of art that I have to witness. And I'm going to teach my children that most of the work that they're going to be doing in that space is witnessing. Because if it's about you, you've already failed the test. With joy and dancing.
I want to just bump what you said. I interviewed an author, and in my interview with her, she's a Black author, she was saying how because she grew up with narratives that were not her own, what an amazing imagination that made for her. So for those of you that are always seeing yourself centered on stage, what imagination might you build if you see works that don't center you? What a gift that might be to you. And I also want to say your question, one thing I do in Seattle, I was on a few boards and I was doing this when I was on boards, but I've been off and I since do it, is I email my friends once a month and I'm like, I want to see this show. If you can't afford it, I will buy you a ticket. And I just go like monthly to shows with friends. And it's a way to stave off loneliness. Seattle is super passive aggressive, hard to make friends. I have a great group of friends because I buy them tickets to see theater, but it's a way to build friends, but it's a way to build community. And the last thing I'll say as an arts journalist is please support arts journalism, support community newspapers. Arts reviews have dwindled. Myself as a performance historian, there's so many theater historians in this room. It is so difficult, I write about contemporary performance, to write about contemporary performance because there's very little documentation of it. And I serve on the board of a great organization called Variable West, which does West Coast arts journalism. Find those community newspapers. I write for a newspaper called South Seal Emerald that was started by a Black man in Seattle, and it's a thriving community newspaper. Support your community newspaper organizations and support them to write about arts, because that work, even though it may not seem important now, or it's a little rinky-dink 500-word review, it's so important to the histories that we tell today and in the future. All right. Well, with that, can we give our amazing panelists a round of applause? This was amazing.
With joy and dancing. I just want to echo. Let's keep applauding for a minute. I just want to say thank you so much for such a deeply ethical and genuine approach to this topic. Just, moving from market and audience into this real question of genuine engagement with community. And there was I felt so much love and so much of what I always hope for when I'm in the experience of a theater or a performance space or a museum or any sort of cultural event, this idea of just an exchange, right? So we are going to be returning at 5 p.m. Central Time today for today's closing conversation with all in attendance. Audience members, feel free to formulate pointed, brief comments or, whatever you have to say or ask of us. We wanted to end on a place where we just sort of thought, what was this experience coming together? I guess I'm speaking with, the members of the research group that I've been speaking with. This has been such a generous time. There's been so much amazing insight, and so much shared. And we're looking forward to that last hour and a half, whatever it takes to have those conversations. If you're on the live stream, feel free to click the link and ask us a question. Thank you.
Quase ano faz que eu tenho muita paz.